Today's daf we're going to learn is Nazir, daf Kaf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Cal Robinson and Art Gold in memory of Art's mother Shirley, Sarah bat Avraham v'zicharecha. Today is her 9th year at site. She was a lifelong learner and striver, a woman born before her time. She sewed, she made mosaics. She was always busy with something. She lives on in the talitot and quilts she made for so many members of her family and her simcha. We're going to get started with a review of the end of yesterday's daf. We've been talking for a little while already about this halacha. Halacha l'Moshe Sinai, this tradition that was passed down, the ma'ot stumim yeplu l'nedava. Again, that means if a Nazir designated money for the sacrifice and then died or got used by accident for something else, or they thought, let's say, it was used for something else, they lost it, they then found, they took other money, they brought the sacrifices, and then they found the old money. So that money gets turned into what we call voluntary burnt offerings. The whole question was why not, right? Isn't there chatat money mixed in? We had a whole discussion about that, and normally that should be left to Yam HaMelech. Anyway, it's halacha l'Moshe Sinai that this is how it goes. But what we saw at the end of yesterday's daf is it's specifically for money, not for things, and then it depends what you say are not exactly like money, not for animals, not for silver bars possibly, not for bars of silver, not for rows, piles of beams, for example. Okay, we saw all different exceptions, but two things to remember about this whole thing. So one is that there's all these exceptions, and it's just money, not other things. Maybe something that's like money, but not things that aren't exactly like money. Again, there were different definitions, what they were. I'm not going to go through all that. The second thing was that Rav Nachman, after the first comment, which was Rav Hamnuna in the name of Rav, that we're talking about money, not animals, came Rav Nachman and said, well, we're only talking about animals that have no blemishes. But animals that have blemishes are more like money because they're sold, right? The assumption, again, depends what you go by, but the assumption is they can be sold immediately and turned into money, and therefore they're more like money. So that's going to be the second part of today's daf. And the first part of today's daf is dealing with all the exceptions. So we're going to have the second part of today's daf is two tannaitic sources that seem to go against, or at least possibly could be read to go against this thing that the Baal Mum is not, an animal with a blemish is not the same as a regular animal for these laws. Well, they're going to question that and resolve the questions, although the second one it's a very long brighter. We're going to kind of end in the middle of it and only get to the resolution tomorrow. The first part of today's daf is going to be about Rav Shimi bar Ashi, who we ended with. We ended with Rav Shimi bar Ashi saying, how could you say it's only money and not animals and not all these other things? He says, what do you mean? Rav Chisda says that when it comes to birds, he's going to say, right, your list would then include not just money and not animals, it would say money and not birds. And birds, we have an explicit statement of Rav Chisda, who says that there's two moments in time where the birds become designated. Again, you buy a pair of birds for all sorts of sacrifices that need a pair of birds. And one is for a burnt offering and one is for a sin offering. There's a model like that where all sorts of sacrifices need that. And they either become designated, one for the olah, one for the chatat, at the moment you purchase them, or at the moment that, if both, let's put it this way, if not at the moment of purchase, you have two options. Either at the moment of purchase by the owner, if not, then the Kohen designates them when the Kohen deals with them in the temple. So basically, that means that if you didn't do it when you purchased them and you just purchased two birds for your sacrifices without designating which was which, they're not considered designated until a much later time when the Kohen actually sacrifices them. Now, it doesn't say anything about there that if you then die, yeplu l'nedava, that they'll be brought as voluntary offerings, even though there's a chatat mixed in. There's an underlying assumption that as long as it's not defined as one for chatat, one for olah, then it will be treated as this combination that in the end will go l'nedava. That's where we ended yesterday's daf. So now comes Rav Papa's retort. Amar le, Rav Papa says to him, because if you recall, you might not remember this, it's details that you can always pay attention to. Rav Shimi bar Ashi said this to Rav Papa. He says, I don't get all these rabbis who say ma'od and not this, money not that. Then you would say money and not birds. And look, birds, not true. Birds remain undesignated until they're actually, theoretically, that is, they could be designated from the beginning, but if you don't, then they remain undesignated until the Kohen brings them in the temple, offers them up as sacrifices. So Amarle, Rav Papa says to him, without answering him, he kind of throws a question back at Rav Shimi and says, but your theory doesn't make any sense according to a Mishnah further on in Nazir. Why? According to you, haditnan, because you're going to basically say, then you're going to say, ma'ot stumim yiplu l'nedava, ofot stumim yiplu l'nedava, right, that birds, and then animals. You're trying to go against all those other rabbis. You're trying to say animals are considered undesignated until you actually designate them and say, this is for chatat, this is for olah, this is for shlamim. And if not, then they can all go to nidava. But I'm going to prove to you, and again, he's going to bring a source that doesn't talk specifically about things going to voluntary, turning into voluntary, sin offerings going into voluntary offerings. He's just going to bring a Mishnah which talks about what happens if you don't designate, you designate animals, but you don't designate them specifically for this one, for this korban, this one for that, this one for that. When you're talking about the Nazirite offerings, it's already as if they're designated. Okay, that's basically what he's coming out to prove. It doesn't have to do, again, just like Rav Shimi's question didn't have to do with that when there's sin offering money mixed in, it still could turn into voluntary. It just really is defining that things are actually defined even before you define them. That's what he's trying to say. So he brings a kind of weird example, and you'll see right away there's a bit of a problem with this. But anyway, we'll see what he quotes. Ditnan, because immediately then Rav Shimi bar Ashi is going to have a good answer. Rashba Gomel. So I'm a Nazir. It's a case of a Nazir. It comes up in Daf Mem He of Masechet Nazir. Rashbag says, if I brought 3 animals, okay, but I didn't say, now what kind of animals? You have to remember, there's 3 animals you bring. There's a kivsa lechatat, that's a female sheep, goes for a sin offering. You have a sheep, a keves, for the burnt offering, a male sheep. And you have a ram for the shlamim offer, for the peace offering. So you brought a female sheep, a male sheep, and a ram. Velo peresh, but you didn't say which was for which. Now you already kind of sense the problem here, which is, it's obvious which is for which, because you have to bring this one for that, this one for that, this one for that. But right now, Rav Papa is not looking at it in that way. And he says, you didn't specify. So now, even though you didn't specify, even if you didn't say, I want the kivsa to be for the sin offering. I want the keves to be for the, right, I want the female sheep to be for the sin offering. I want the male sheep to be for the burnt offering. And I want the ram to be for the shlamim. It doesn't matter. It's already as if you said that. Okay, so what is he trying to use this to prove? Amen. Why would this be? Didn't you say until you specify, just like with the birds, until the Kohen says, this one is Ola, this one is Chata? It's not. So wouldn't you say the same with the animals? And look, this Mishnah proves not. To which obviously we're going to hear his retort, although he adds something in the beginning. He basically wants to say the laws are clearly different when you're talking about 2 birds that are the same birds and you need to designate them, as opposed to these animals, which are clear. This one goes for this one goes for that, and this one, because you can't use, for example, a female animal for a sin offering, and you can't use a male offering. You basically, for the male for the chatat, because it's specifically supposed to be a female sheep. So that's going to be the obvious answer, but it's going to be a little bit longer of an answer. Amrlei Hatan, he said, there by the birds, there's special drashot from the psukim. Okay, it says, Vilakach v'asa amar Rahman. The Torah specifically says, now, when the Torah says one is for a sin offering and one is for a burnt offering, there's verbs right next to those words. So let's look at the psukim inside. In Vayikra chapter 12, verse 8, it says, and if she doesn't find, this is for a woman who gives birth, im lo timtza yada deseh, she can't afford the seh, the goat offering, velakcha shtei torim o shnei bnei yonah. She takes 2 birds, either turtle doves or pigeons, echad le'olah ve'echad lechatat. Okay, now what does it say? Vilakcha. Lakcha means, doesn't mean to take, literally to take, it means to purchase. In the Torah, lakachat, okay, ki kachi shisha, he uses money, right? That's lekichat kiddushin. So lakcha is when she buys shnei torim o shnei bnei yonah, one le'olah, one lechatat. So here you see that she can designate it at the time of the purchase. The next pasuk they're quoting is from Vayikra Tavav, chapter 15, verse 30. V'asa kohen et echad chataf et echad olah. And then it says the Kohen took one for a sin offering and one for a burnt offering. So there you see the Kohen can determine also. So basically, it comes to Shimi bar Ashi say, right? When it comes to the bird, there's a special drasha in the Pasuk that tells you either you're going to designate it this way or you're going to designate you're right at this time or you're going to designate that time. Otherwise, it's going to be Satum. That's what I used to prove my point. Hacha, now it says hachanami, it shouldn't be nami. Many commentaries take out the word nami because hachanami means it's going to be exactly the same, and it's not at all the same. Hacha means here. Here meaning in the case of the animals that you just quoted, though, it's totally different. Mimatzid Amar, we're now moving to Amud Bet. Mimatzid Amar, Hadran dechatet gravola. You can't possibly have thought that the male sheep that you brought for the female sheep that you brought for the sin offering, Hadin dechata, the one you brought for the sin offering, tikrav olah, you would think you could use that for the burnt offering? That's a female animal, and you need a male animal. In other words, like we thought from the beginning, the question from what Rashbag says is totally irrelevant because obviously it's going to be already determined even before you said the words, this is for my sin offering, this is for my burnt offering, etc. Because it's obvious. The Torah specifically designated certain animals, the female sheep and the male sheep. The female one obviously goes for the female, the one the sacrifice is supposed to be from a female. The male one obviously goes with the one for the male. So therefore, you can't bring me questions from that source. And we're left with a debate. We have a debate, and again, there's a debate within a debate. So we have two approaches. We have Rav Shimi bar Ashi, who basically says anything that's not designated. It could be animals, it could be birds, it could be anything. If it's not designated, okay, it would have to be with the animal, it would have to be something that couldn't be brought as a sacrifice. Let's say they brought a bull and said, this bull will be for my Nazir offerings, meaning I'll sell the bull when it gets blemished and I'll purchase with it animals for my sacrifice. And then that is not considered, that's considered satum according to Rav Shimi bar Ashi. And the law is that if I were to die or I were to use something else to buy my sacrifices, that money would be used to buy burnt offerings. Okay. And that would apply for anything that can be turned into money. Rav Shimi bar Ashi thinks until I specify, it's not specified. It doesn't matter what it is that I set aside. Versus the other rabbis who think it really depends on what it is. And then there was a little debate within animals, but not blemished animals. Right? Blemished animals are like money. Animals are on the other category. What about the silver? We had a debate about bars of silver because you do use it as money, but on the other hand, it's not really like money. How do we view that? Again, there were different interpretations there, and etc. Right? All the cases that we brought. So you have that debate, but they all agree, obviously, on this case of if you brought particular animals for the Nazir and you didn't say which was for which, and it's obvious which is for which, that's already considered designated. So we do have some points where they agree, but those are kind of more obvious points. On the other points, they disagree. Now we're going to go to our two questions. And as you see, it's a very short daf. It's not going to take us too long to finish this. We now have two questions from tannaitic sources on Rav Nachman, as I mentioned earlier. Rav Nachman, who says that a Baal Mum is different from an animal. A regular animal that can be brought as a sacrifice, that is already considered as if it was determined. And again, what that means, what does that mean? It means that if there's chatat, you put it aside an animal or something that could have been sacrificed. And even though it can't be, let's say, brought for a Nazir sacrifice, like it was a bull, which isn't brought, that would already be as if it's determined, meaning it's considered as if there's sin offering money mixed in, and because there's sin offering money mixed in, again, now some of the commentaries say, by the way, you'd have to send that all to Yam HaMelech because you don't need, or maybe you'd have to take a third of it to Yam HaMelech. There's a debate, but at least you have to relate to the fact that there's sin offering money in there, and you can't just turn everything into voluntary burnt offerings. Okay, so, but he says that that's not true with a Be'emat Ba'alat Mum. If you bring an animal that's blemished, it's going to be considered just like the money. So now the Gemara is going to ask, first Rav Hamnuna is going to ask, we'll start with his question, then we'll get to Rav. Mativ Rav Hamnuna. You want to say that a blemished animal is like an animal that's a stuma, that has it's not determined at all? Tashma, let's learn from here. We're going to get to a Mishnah soon, which talks about a father and a son who take upon nazirut. There's two tracks here, okay? And there's actually a debate about which one is which. We're going to go with a version that the Bach goes with. The Bach fixes our text and says, don't read it like this, read it like that. And it's one of these cases where the important part of the Breita they forgot to quote. Many times they quote a Breita and you think, we could have just stopped here, but they continue and quote you the whole rest of the Breita, even though it's not really relevant. In this case, they're doing the reverse. They skip the part that's important. So we'll have to fill it in. So you have a father and a son. There could be one case where the father took upon to be a Nazir. And there's a special halakha Moshe Sinai that if that father separates, and we'll see it's going to be specifically money for his sacrifice, not animals. We'll get to that later. He separates money for his sacrifices. And then the father dies. And the son, this is very common, right? The son feels like, wow, my father just died. He was a Nazir. He didn't get to bring a sacrifice here. He had money set aside. I'm going to be a Nazir, kind of continue the legacy of my father, be a Nazir. And when I'm done, I'm going to use his money to buy my sacrifices. There's a special halakha Moshe Sinai tradition that the son is allowed to use the sacrifices of the father in that case. However, okay, it has to be money, we're going to see later today, and not animals. If it were animals, he wouldn't be able to use them, only if it was money. And then there's another halacha that if they were nazirim at the same time, and they both took upon nazirut, which is another common thing, right? The father's going to be a nazir, he brings his son along with him. They both become nazirim. The father sets aside money for his sacrifices. The father dies. The son cannot use the money in that case, okay? So let's start off and read. And like I said, I'm going to correct the text that says here to the way the Bach corrects it. This is a person can shave on the nazirut of his father. This is a catchphrase to mean he can use the money his father set aside and bring them as his sacrifices on the day he does his shaving. Bisman shaya, now you have to change this because it's the opposite. Bisman shaya aviv nazir. Okay, when his father was a nazir, v'hifrish aviv ma'ot lenizirutov v'meit, and the father designated money for his nazirut, and then he died. That's when it works. V'amal, and he says, the son says, Hareini nazir menach agaleach ma'ot abba. He says, I'm going to be a nazir on the condition. He actually says it. I forgot to mention this. He says it, that I'm doing it on the condition. When he takes upon the nazirut, he says, I'm doing it on the condition that I'm using my father's money. That works. Now you have to basically fill in the gap that's missing here. The gap that's missing is, but if he did it together with his father and his father died, then he can't do that, okay? Now, in that case, what happens with the father's money? So again, this is the classic that we keep seeing. Hayulo ma'ot stumot, in which case he cannot use that money because we just said he can't use the money because they were both nizikin together. And it wasn't the case where the father was a nazir, died, and then the son wants to take the money. So in this case, what do you do if it was money that the father set aside and didn't say anything about it? This is the same halacha we've been learning. Ma'ot stumot yivlu l'nedava. If the ma'ot were not clarified which was going for which sacrifice, which money for which sacrifice, then it all goes to burnt offerings. On the flip side, we have haitalo behema mufreshet, but if he had an animal that he specifically designated and said, I want this animal for this sacrifice, this animal for this sacrifice, if it was a chatat, right? Let's say he said, I'm bringing, let's say a bull offering, this bull, which can't be used, but he said, I'm going to use it for the sin offering, which basically means I'm going to sell it and use the money to buy a sin offering. Then if it was a chatat, if he said it for the sin offering, tamut, that animal has to be left to die. There's nothing to do with it. Ola tikhav ola ushlamim ikavu shlamim. So here, what do you have? If the animal was unspecified, then it has to go, right? It doesn't matter. It's as if it was specified. I'm sorry, if the animal, they give two opposite cases. They're giving if the animal was specified. Once the animal's specified, then it's going to be left to die. They don't bring the in-between, right? If the animal was unspecified. So now they say, my lav afilu behalat mum. Does this not even include, when it says the animal, now what the assumption is, what they really seem to mean, and this is the way it's taken as, it's an animal that wasn't specified exactly which is which. Okay, even the Mefarish, for example, says, In other words, it could be he designated 3 animals, and then it was clear that one was for each, and then he didn't say which ones, so you're going to have to treat it as if, right, one was for chatat, one was for olah, one was for shlamim, basically meaning once it goes into the animal sphere, you cannot say they all can go as voluntary offerings. So the main thing to note here is there's a distinction between money and animals, to which the Rav Hamnuna says, since it distinguishes very clearly money versus animals and doesn't say blemished animals versus non-blemished animals, what do we assume? The word animal must include all animals, whether they're blemished or whether they're not blemished, which seems to mean that blemished animals are the same as regular animals. So that's what we're going to see right now. My love, is it not? Afilu ba'alat mum, doesn't the word animal include animal blemished, animal not blemished? Shouldn't it not make a difference? To which the Gemara says, no, Tamima, no. You could say when it says animal, just like Rav Nachman said earlier, because this was against Rav Nachman, behema means behema, tmima, behema that can be sacrificed and not a behema that couldn't be sacrificed. Gemara is not satisfied with that answer because, if so, they're going to say, so let's just read, avabalat mum kistuma damgi. You want to say if it's a blemished animal, then it's unspecified, like it goes on the money side, because we basically have money versus animal. So if that's the case, ma'ir yama'ot. Why does it say money then? It should say, Lema haitalo be'emat balat mum yiflu l'nedava. That's a bigger, as we say, a bigger chidush, right? It's a more unique halacha, that even if it's an animal, but it's blemished, we're going to put it in the category of money. So if it wanted to start giving distinctions, it should have said, instead of giving the extreme case there and the extreme case there, money versus animal, it should have said animal with a blemish versus animal without a blemish. And then it would have taught you what you're trying to say. To which the Gemara says, Hachinami, no, that really is what it means. Okay, didn't say it. What do you mean that's what it means? Well, ba'alat mum lamai kadisha. If you sanctify an animal that's blemished, okay, normally you sanctify an animal, it's because I want to sacrifice it on the altar. But if you sacrifice an animal that's blemished, basically what are you doing? You're basically sanctifying it lidame. You're basically saying the value of this animal I'm sanctifying, which basically means money. So therefore, dme hainu ma'ot, the value of is money. So when it says money, it obviously includes anything that you sanctify for its value, because for its value means for the money I will get when I sell the animal. So basically, behemah ba'alat mum is included in the word money, even though it's not exactly, right? But since the only value of this blemished animal when it comes to offering it as a sacrifice is the value of it when I sell it, therefore it's obvious that it's money. And the source there, that Braita, didn't even need to mention. So basically, we took a little while to get there, but very simply, the source here, the tannaitic source, distinguishes between money and animals. We thought to put in the animal category also blemished animals. Comes the Gemara and says, no. Blemished animals clearly go in the category of money, and that's obvious because blemished animals are only valuable for their monetary value on the shuk when you sell it in the marketplace. Okay, and that's the same thing we're going to do for the next source as well, but we're not going to get to the answer yet today. But it's going to be the same idea. We're going to have a source, and it's actually a quite complicated source. There's many different scenarios here. We'll get to some of them today, some of them tomorrow. We'll already see the part that we're going to raise the issue with, which is, again, you're going to have money versus animal. And then they're going to say, well, animal should include even blemish. And in the end, they'll say, oh, no, money versus animal, money, really, blemished animals go on the money side. Mativ Rava. Now here, we're quoting from passages in Vayikra chapter 4, which all talk about sin offerings. And there's different sin offerings. If a person who's an individual sins, if a person who's a leader sins, and a different type of leaders they mention, and if the community sins as a whole, and these are all accidental sinning. Shkaga, it's called. So you make a mistake, do something wrong. Like, for example, the classic examples are you ate chalev or you ate blood. Okay, you didn't realize. Those things are forbidden. If you do them intentionally, you get karet, cut off. That's a pretty serious sin. If you do things that you would get karet, if it was intentional, if you do them accidentally, you bring a korban hatat, a sin offering. That's your classic sin offering. And in the psukim where it talks about your sin offering, and it talks about, again, like I said, there's the individual, there's the nasi, a leader, there's a kohen gadol. Anyway, it talks about all those people. And each time it says you bring your korban. It could have just said korban. It says your korban. So they're going to darshan 4 times where the word your sacrifice comes in to exclude something. Then the other thing you need to know before we start is that there's also sin. So we talked about chaylev and blood, for example, the forbidden fats in the blood that you eat, that would be karet. There's things that are more severe than that. For example, if you are mechalel Shabbat, you do something against Shabbat, you do a malacha on Shabbat, something you're forbidden to do, accidentally. If you do it intentionally, you get stoned. That's more serious than karet because the court, karet is God, in the hands of God. But skila, the court imposes, it's a court-imposed penalty, and they stone you. That's considered more harsh, more stringent. And that also you bring a chatat. And you might remember, Masechet Shabbat, we kept saying, patur aval asul, is right? You're exempt, but it's for, no, not for patur aval asur, sorry. Many times you see chayav hatat. There were many times where it says you're obligated a sin offering. And that basically means if you were to do this accidentally, you'd have to bring a sin offering because it's actually asur midoraita, as opposed to, confusion for a minute, as opposed to patur aval asur, which means you're exempt. You're exempt from what? You're exempt from the sin offering because it's not a Torah law, but it's still forbidden because the rabbis forbade it. So there's always this, they're always relating to this korban chatat because they're talking about all sorts of sins somebody might do unintentionally, thinking that it's okay, and it turns out it wasn't, or thinking it's not Shabbat, and it turns out it was. Okay, all sorts of cases. So Mativ Rava. Rava comes and says, korbano. So the first korbano is going to darshan in this way. B'korbano yotzei ve'eno yotzei b'korban aviv. Oh, very similar to the previous, except that now we're talking about sin offerings and not Nazir offerings. You're obligated for your sacrifice, meaning you have to bring your own sacrifice. You can, I didn't mean obligated, you can fulfill your obligation through your own sacrifice only, but not your father's. For example, right? Let's say, like we said before, your father dies and leaves money that he sinned, and you sinned. He designated money for his sin offering. Can you use it for yours? Comes to buy your sacrifice, comes the bride to say, your own sacrifice it has to be. You can't use your father's. You might say, maybe this means if I did something more severe than my father, like I did something on Shabbat, and my father ate forbidden fats. You might have said, right, it's only then I can. Or maybe it's the reverse. Maybe I can't do it when I did something less severe. My father did something more severe. Again, as long as the chatat, the sin offering, is on a different level. Now, of course, it's the same sin offering, but the point being, we're each obligated a sin offering from something more severe or less severe than the other. Maybe you would have thought that, Aval, you might have thought. But maybe if we're at the same level, maybe it would work. And I ate dung. He had the forbidden fats, I ate blood. Both of those, and we both did it accidentally. Maybe then I could use this. Talmud Lomar, korbano, comes the second with your sacrifice to teach you, no, can't do that either. Now they're going to suggest a third, like why you have a third. Maybe it's only what I can't use is an animal my father sacrificed. But maybe I could use, okay, now why animal would be more harsh, that I couldn't use his animal, but maybe I could use his money. Why? We have a paradigm from what we just learned before. What did we just learn about the Nazir? That if it's money, I can use it. If it's animals, I can't use it. So it comes the bride to here and suggests, right? Maybe if it's my father's animal that he did, even if it's the same level, kalal, kala, chamura, how do I know? I know I can't do that. Because when it comes even to the father and the son in Nazir, and I'm allowed to do something, but I'm not allowed with an animal to use his. But maybe if my father just designated money for his sin offering, maybe even if we're not even at the same level, the fact that he set money aside for his sin offering, and now I need a sin offering, maybe it will work. Shaharei, on what basis? Because we already just learned that we have this tradition, halacha l'moshe misinai, that what? I can use my father's money. If he designated money for his Nazirite sacrifices, I can use it. So maybe I could do it also with a sin offering. Talmud lomar, I'm already into tomorrow's daf, but I don't want to finish mid-sentence. Talmud lomar korbano, but korbano yotze ve'eno yotze b'korban afiv. So what do you see here, right? Korbano, the third korbano comes to teach us. The first two taught you about animals, if he had designated animals. The second two come to teach you about money. Okay, that money I can't use either. But now, what do you already see here? What's important for our purposes? You see here this distinction between money and animals. And it says here that money of your father can be used if it wasn't specified, right? Whereas animals can be. And again, you would think animals would go on the side, it would include blemished and unblemished, and that stands up against money. So we're going to get to that tomorrow. How do we resolve that? Probably already have an inkling from today's daf. Anyway, before we end and summarize, I want to just point out one thing I saw in the chat, which is how could you think to use the sin offering of someone else's? Isn't it left to die and all that? And that this is the basis for that halacha. In other words, this is saying sin offerings of someone else cannot be used no matter what. We're going to go through all sorts of permutation, but in the end, we're going to learn from this word bikorbano that it means you have to use your own offering. You can't use someone's sin offering. So you're right, you can't. But braitas, and what we call, this is a braita in the style of a midrash halacha, they like to raise lots of possibilities, even though in the end they're going to knock them out. They just want to say, you might have thought, you might have thought, you might have thought, but it's not the case. So don't worry if you think this goes against what we've learned about it, but that's the case. Okay, so let's just do a quick review of today's daf. We started with Rav Shimi bar Ashi. We had his question yesterday on all the people who said ma'od and not animals, ma'od and not this, ma'od and not that, only money. And he said, what do you mean only money? Stays unspecified, but animals are already considered specified even if you don't specify them. What about the birds that are not considered specified until you specify? To which Rav Papa said, what, you want to say animals are unspecified? Here I'm going to show you. You're going to say animals remain unspecified? That's what you're trying to prove? I can show you they don't. Look at that Mishnah with Rashbag who says these unspecified animals clearly are specified. To which Rav Shimi said, that's not a question against me. That's a unique case because each animal, there's only one animal that can be used for this, one animal that can be used for that, one animal that can be used for that. It was totally obvious. That's not what I was referring to. I was referring to cases where you bring something that could be used for both, or you bring an animal like a bull, which can't be used for any of them, and you don't specify which one it's for. That's going to be left unclear, stumim. And according to Rav Shimi bar Ashi, he's going to think that that money, even though it included in it a sin offering, since we have no idea which one it was going for, we can put them all into olot nidaba. And that was, again, he stood up against all these other rabbis who didn't think that that was the case. Then we brought two questions, Rav Hamnuna and this question of Rava, which we didn't finish yet, which basically tried to say, your exclusion of putting balmum on the side, an animal that's blemished, putting it on the side of money, doesn't seem to work with these sources that seem to clearly differentiate between money and animals, and as if animals include all animals, to which the first answer was, no, money includes unblemished animals, because unblemished animals that you sanctify are not worthy to go on the altar, and therefore the only thing they're worthy for is for their value, and money means value, right? Something that all you are going to use it for is for its value. So therefore, he basically said, that's not a question, or the Gemara answered, that's not a question on Rav Nachman, and Rava's we were in the middle of. And when we start tomorrow, we'll review the different stages of Rava's drasha that he brings from a braita, and we'll go into the next sections of what else he learns from this word b'korbanot in all the times that it appears, and each time it's coming to limit something. And again, the main point, though, we already got to, which was this behema versus ma'ot, where we're going to assume animal includes animal blemished or unblemished. That's it for today. Wishing everybody a Shavua Tov, a good week.